You want the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
You can't handle the truth!
Well, we're giving you the Michigan Sports Truth, the show that reveals facts, truth, research, and statistics and never messes around. With your hosts, Taylor Phillips, Ed Smith, Frank Vashner, and Buck Geno. We lay down the entire truth about everything regarding your Detroit and Michigan sports teams, no matter how uncomfortable they may be. No junk, no entertainment, no homerism, no coddling, no pop culture, no opinions, no shilling, and no fluff. Follow me, Taylor Phillips, on Twitter at DT2Phillips with 2 L's. Follow Ed Smith on Twitter at EdSmith313. Follow Frank Vashner at Frank_Vashner, VAJCNER. And follow Buck Geno on Twitter at BuckGeno3rd. Also like our Facebook page, The Michigan Sports Truth, and join our Facebook group with the same name. The hosts of the Michigan Sports Truth podcast do not take any suggestions or criticism from any member of its audience on how it should be run. It is up to the host to decide what they want to cover. They also do not intend to be any amount of popular in any way, shape, form, or fashion. Additionally, the views of the audience, right or wrong, do not reflect the actual truth revealed on this program.
Episode 292 is now in session. Taylor Phillips and Buck Geno with you guys. Got a whole lot to recap, plus some to talk about, involving Jim Harbaugh, Wilton Speight, Andre Drummond. But first off, let's recap the Lions here.
Touchdown, Detroit Lions!
The Lions got outplayed by the Minnesota Vikings and lost 30-23. They were outgained in total yards. They got out-amounted in first downs, and they turned the ball over 2 times. The Vikings didn't turn the ball over at any times. Their offense got off to another slow start. Got only 1 red zone touchdown. Again, they continue to struggle again in the red zone to score touchdowns, and they kept settling for field goals. The Minnesota Vikings came up with more points than the Lions did. As a result, the Lions defense just couldn't hold the Vikings in check. Case Keenum and his offense did their job. The Lions now fall to 6-5. Buck, the Lions may still be in the hunt, but they're heading for a fall.
Well, if you watch the game on Thursday, the couple things that stood out to me. Number one, defensively for the Lions, you talked about them not being able to stop Minnesota. They really had a hard time against the run, which is somewhat surprising given the fact that Minnesota, with Case Keenum, has been a pretty balanced offense, so that you know that they're not going to try to air out the ball and try to pass you to death. So you have to be prepared for the type of, especially since you played them already this year, you should know kind of what they're going to try to do. So, really the telling part was the first drive of the second quarter, the second half, when Minnesota basically just bludgeoned them into submission, went right down the field, running the football exclusively, and finally getting into the end zone to make the score at that point 27-10. And I don't want to say the game was over at that point, but that was kind of the death knell for the Lions, because the way the offense was playing, Matthew Stafford was not his accurate self. Missed a lot of short throws, especially the screens and the flares. Just didn't have a lot of touch on those, and that could have been probably because of the bad ankle. But he just was not on target. Missed some throws that he needed to make for them to be successful. And in the end, as you mentioned, struggling in the red zone at times. And really, I think for the Lions, it bears mentioning again that they just could not run the football. When you look at the rushing attempts, only 15 rushing attempts out of 50 plays for 53 yards, and no semblance of any type of balance in that offense. And Jim Bob Cooter, who was roundly criticized last week for trying to install some balance in that offense and run the football, no matter how ineffective it was, kind of got away from that. And a little bit of that was the product of them being down early, so had to try to get themselves back into the game. But boy, the Lions just came out and met a Minnesota team that was ready to play, and Detroit's slow starts, as they have had almost exclusively for the past 2 years, comes back to haunt them. They end up getting within one score, but Minnesota drives down and then was able to run out the clock for the victory. So if you're the Lions looking at your schedule ahead, they have 5 teams that are really beatable teams, but to win 5 straight games is a lot to ask of a team that, as it gets into the later months, cannot run the football. And to be successful in this league, passing obviously is your preferred weapon of choice, but you still have to be able to run and give the defense a reason to respect that aspect of your game. And right now the Lions just don't do it. Defensively, I thought that they were out-schemed. Case Keenum was finding multiple receivers open and often, and a lot of matchup problems for the Lions to start off the game. Lots of wide receivers on linebackers and running backs that were roaming free. So Case Keenum did what he normally does, which is distribute the ball to multiple targets. He had 7 guys that he threw balls to at one point during the game, completing 6 of those guys. So for the Lions, coverage issues were an issue, but it really had to be said that the matchups were probably the biggest problem, because Adam Thielen, who is their leading receiver, constantly was finding himself against either a linebacker or a nickelback and was finding a lot of open space. So not a great game for the Lions. They go down to 6-5, and it was kind of a must-win game for them if you're talking about the division, because now they are way behind the Minnesota Vikings. So unless something drastically happens in the next 5 weeks, the Minnesota Vikings will be your NFC North champions. And the Lions right now, their goal is to stay in the hunt for a wild card spot. The problem for them lies with the fact that the teams they lost to, a lot of them are ahead in that wild card race. And all the teams that the Lions currently are either tied with or one game behind won today. So other than the Packers, who just had the game at 28 with Pittsburgh, the Lions find themselves losing when everybody else is winning. And in the NFL, with only so many games to make up, I mean, this isn't baseball where you can get hot for a 2-week, 3-week stretch and cover a lot of ground. It's a week-by-week process. And right now they have a lot of teams in front of them that, if the season ended today, would hold tiebreakers over them, and they would not be in the playoffs. So they don't really have anybody to blame but themselves. And for them to get any sort of look at the playoffs, and we'll go over this in our 5-question segment, but their chances to make the playoffs right now solely rest on their ability to beat some of the teams that they're going to be playing in the next 5 weeks who are considerably worse than them record-wise, and see if they can get hot, so to speak, and some of the other teams ahead of them maybe coming back to the pack and losing some games. So they're going to kind of have to depend on other teams right now, aside from them having to win. I would say they would have to win 4 out of the next 5 to even have a chance to get into the playoffs based on how everything looks today, and it's going to be a tough sled. I think for the Lions to expect to win all of those games, they'll probably be favored in most of, if not all of those games, but it's going to be tough because they're going to have to win almost all of them, and they're going to have to hope other teams start to falter down the stretch.
Yep, absolutely. They have the Baltimore Ravens on the road next. The Ravens are 5-5. That kicks off next Sunday, December 3rd at 1 on Fox. It's not too hard of a game, except it's on the road. But the Lions have beaten easy teams on the road at least a couple times this season. Take the Giants, for example. And even take the Bears, but just barely by 3. They almost gave that one away.
Yeah, and the Lions away from home have been considerably better. Surprisingly enough, they are now, I think, 2-4 at Ford Field. So a really sad home record for a team that, to this point, up till this year, was pretty bad on the road. So if they hadn't been playing good on the road, or at least played some teams that they should beat on the road, we'd be talking about a losing football team right now. But that said, Baltimore's going to be playing Houston tomorrow in the Monday night game. So they'll have one less day of rest, one less day of prep. Houston doesn't seem to be a formidable task, but it is a professional football game, so they have to prepare for that. They cannot look ahead. That's about the only advantage right now that the Lions are going to have. Lions and Ravens should go into that game with equal 6-5 records, and from that point, I think that again, you're looking at a team that, if you're looking at Baltimore, who is a team that is kind of hovering around the 500 mark, I don't think they'll be getting into the playoffs either. But that said, right now they're in that wild card race, so this is a game that they need as well. So you're going to have two teams that coming to play have something to play for, and you're going to have to prepare to win that game on the road. And again, in tough environments against decent to good football teams, the Lions haven't proven over the last few seasons to be reliable in those situations. So I'm not saying Detroit can't win that game, but the odds are not with them, and we'll see how they come back. They're going to be coming off of a long rest, obviously playing on a short week in the Thanksgiving holiday, so they'll have plenty of rest and plenty of prep for Baltimore, whereas Baltimore kind of comes off that short week after playing tomorrow. So that's going to be their inherent advantage, and hopefully, if for their sake, they can take advantage of it, but it remains to be seen right now because their offense is very inconsistent, and defensively they have some guys missing injury-wise that would be able to help them out, but Baltimore also struggling on offense, find a consistent rhythm. So it should be interesting, and we'll see what happens next week.
Yeah, the Lions have had a very bad history in Baltimore against the Ravens. I don't think they've ever beaten the Ravens in Baltimore before in their franchise history, have they?
No, I do not believe they have. I'll have to take a double check on that, but I'm pretty sure that they haven't. And again, that's one of those things where you look at and it's easy to try to make that comparison and find out how many games they win and how many games have they played. But those are years past, and those don't have a lot of bearing. But you're right. They haven't been successful in Baltimore, and that's got to be something that they want to take advantage of this week with the longer rest and the extra prep, whereas Baltimore does not have that. So if there's one thing that should happen, it should be not another slow start, because they should have their game plan ready to go, and they should be able to get out to a better start than they have in a long time, and hopefully that'll propel them, if you're a Lions fan, to a win.
Mm-hmm. That's true. So that's pro football and the Lions, and now we transition to the game.
Touchdown, Michigan!
The Michigan Wolverines jumped out to a 14-0 lead over the Ohio State Buckeyes in after the first quarter, but then the Buckeyes seemed to get everything back together, and everything started to fall back into place. G.T. Barrett got injured prior to the game in a collision with a cameraman. He got injured later in the third quarter. And Haskins Jr. took over, and he carried the rest of the offense on his back. The freshman quarterback, he's showing that he's the next Ohio State quarterback, while Michigan was stuck with John O'Korn, and he threw a very awful interception to pretty much ice it, because the Buckeyes added an insurance touchdown late.
Yeah, I mean, you look at this game, and Michigan started out at least defensively very well. Offensively, they still kind of sputtered around. They were able to get out to a 14-0 lead, but the way that the offense had been playing, you kind of felt that was a little bit of, I don't want to say beginner's luck, but obviously Ohio State was able to settle in against Geno. I was actually surprised that it was a 14-point spread early in the second, but they started to flex their muscle, and JT Barrett started to open up some lanes and start to complete some passes, and they got the game tied by halftime. And the momentum certainly shifted in their favor. Michigan did go ahead midway through the third quarter, but from that point on, their offense was pretty stagnant. And John O'Corn, who was serviceable for the first part of that game, now he missed a lot of throws early in the game that could have really helped out the Wolverines. He didn't complete them, and they weren't close. I mean, he wasn't hitting guys that were in tight coverage. I mean, he's missing wide open players, and the trend continued throughout the game. And as it got into the third and fourth quarters, as you mentioned, that backbreaking interception as they were driving late in the fourth to perhaps go ahead on that drive, and instead that ball gets turned over and they turn around, they being Ohio State, drive it right back down the field in 3 plays and scored the insurance touchdown by Mike Weber. The defense did as much as they could. I don't think the defense played their best game, but I think that they were able to do enough to keep them in it, which is kind of what they've been asking them to do, playing a team like Ohio State who can be explosive offensively. You kind of felt like the shoe was going to drop at some point, and it did in that late third quarter and throughout the fourth quarter, because Ohio State started to flex its muscle. And when Dwayne Haskins came in for an injured JT Barrett, he actually improved the Ohio State offense and was able to throw the football and really move them down the field almost at will. They got a big stop when they stopped Ohio State for a field goal try that was good with 10 minutes or so left to go in the fourth quarter. And I thought at that point, even though Michigan had played subpar to that point, as far as what you would expect, they were still in that game. And I think that a lot of that credit goes to the defense, as they were able to keep the Ohio State Buckeyes off the board for the first quarter and change. So that said, it's just another broken record that Michigan, with all its problems on offense, they still give up 31 points. And you can't expect the defense to continually go out there and keep your opponent to less than 17 points every single game and hope that that's going to be enough, because even though Michigan's defense is one of the top defenses in the Big Ten, you just can't expect them to hold off a team like Ohio State for 4 quarters. They're going to get some points, they're going to make some drives, they're going to make some plays, and Ohio State made the plays, Michigan didn't. There was a lot of times where John O'Corn either, like I said, missed wide open receivers or failed to spot them and took sacks when he could have thrown the ball away. There was a couple of times where all he had to do was throw the ball into the second row to not take a sack, and instead took the sack when there was either a player open or on the other side just wasn't anything there. But because he was outside the tackle box, all he had to do was throw it away, and he didn't do it. So just not a great game from John O'Corn, but that's not really surprising because what we've seen out of him this year and last year. And it's just kind of disappointing if you're a Michigan fan, because I don't think that if you put Brandon Peters in there, that Michigan wins that game. But I can tell you that
he keeps it closer.
I think that they probably are more successful offensively, and maybe that can help them down the road. And I think that a lot of the Michigan fans that are blaming John O'Corn are correct, because he didn't really play that great of a game. But you also have to look at the fact that that's all the options they had. It was either that or go with Alex Malzone, who hasn't played a significant snap this year. So they're down to their third quarterback by default just because of injury. And the other thing that you have to look at that is the offensive line has been pretty bad for Michigan. And when you get two quarterbacks hurt, that usually means somebody's hitting them. And that's what's happened is Michigan's offensive line, I think, is kind of the lead that's been buried throughout the whole year. They just haven't been very good in pass protection. And I know that John O'Corn missed a lot of throws, and he did not play well. But even when they've had Peters and at the beginning of the season, Wilton Spade in, a lot of pressure has been getting to the quarterback, and a lot of bad throws have come because of it. So I just don't think that if you're a Michigan fan, and you can only lean on, I think, I just think that overall they're not in a good place right now. This is somewhat of a transition year. O'Corn was a miss by Harbaugh because, they could have turned him away. They could have said, no, we don't have any room for you. We don't need you to come to transfer here. But Harbaugh thought he was going to give them some depth, and to this point hasn't been able to do the job. So Michigan's at 8-4. They're kind of who, at least I thought they would be, losing games to Ohio State and losing games to Penn State and Wisconsin. Outside of the Michigan State game, which was I wouldn't say a surprise, but just kind of a disappointment. Michigan's kind of where I thought they would be. I had them at 9-3 going into this season, and other than that Michigan State loss, they're right there. And they're not the best football team in the Big Ten. They're the best football team in their division. And until they get a quarterback that can stay in there for 12 games and complete the passes that they need to and run the offense how it needs to be run, they're not going to get any better. So say what you will about all the turnover that Michigan had, all the young guys they had playing, but I think that a lot of people that had this team with the expectation of them winning a division title and going on to a CFP berth were completely just out of their skis there, because that's just not what this team was going to be, and that was before the season started. I think they're lucky right now to be 8-4 with all the things that have been going on at the quarterback position and how poorly their offensive line has played. So you can take some solace in that, but I think that looking ahead to next year, they've got to be better, and that's what people demand, and that's what people want. Jim Harbaugh was hired to beat these teams. He was hired to beat Michigan State. He was hired to beat Ohio State. He was hired to beat Penn State. That's what he was supposed to be doing. And in year 3, now the combined 1-5 record against their main rivals in the conference, that's not good. And they're going to have to find some ways to turn that around, because if you look at the landscape of the division, Ohio State with Dwayne Haskins Jr. coming in next year, probably going to be their starting quarterback. They're going to be a very good football team. Michigan State with Brian Lewerke in a younger, skewing team, they're not going to get any worse. So they've got a job cut out ahead of them. And the Michigan fans that think that Jim Harbaugh is going to come in and drive them to a CFP berth, that's not the case. And I think that a reality check year for them is going to either A, prove to people that the problems run a lot deeper than the coach, or B, they're just going to have to be kind of resolute with the fact that they might not be the Michigan that at least people in my age group remember as a kid, the dominating team in that conference for so many years. It just hasn't happened in the last 7 to 8 years, and actually extending past a decade. So it wasn't a great loss for Michigan, but I think that if you're a realist, that's what should have been expected to happen on Saturday, that they weren't going to win the football game. And it'll be interesting to see, as we'll talk about later, as the clouds start to shift, and talking about Wilton Spade transferring. They've really kind of got their work cut out for them, especially with their schedule next year. They have three games that they have to go on the road. They have to go on the road against ND, who's going to be a very good team. They have to go on the road to Michigan State and Ohio State as well. And they're also going to have to play some tougher games at home. So They're not out of the woods by any stretch of the imagination, and we'll see what happens. They're going to play in a bowl game. I imagine probably like the Holiday Bowl or one of those lower tier bowls, and from there they're just going to have to see what they have coming up for next year. And boy, if you're a Michigan fan and you're a realist, you're looking at next year thinking, I know next year is kind of the turning point, the fourth year, but with the teams they have in their division, in the competition they play, and the places they have to play them at, it doesn't look good right now, and we'll see what happens next season.
Speaking of Jim Harbaugh, he denied those reports that he was offered a lifetime contract. He called it fake news. That was reported by one of those reporters, Tyler Conway of Bleacher Report, who also reported that there were murmurings, quote unquote, that Harbaugh could leave Michigan for the NFL's Chicago Bears, a franchise for which he played during his professional career and has great affinity for. The Bears, currently having head coach John Fox, who's had a bad record with the Chicago Bears. After a very good season in 2003, with the Carolina Panthers winning that NFC Championship.
Well, those rumors are always going to swirl around a guy like Jim Harbaugh, just because it's a convenient story. But number one, the lifetime contract thing, no. Michigan's not going to hand over a lifetime contract to a guy who hasn't beat Ohio State yet. He's only beat Michigan State once, and that was a pretty down year for Michigan State. So handing a lifetime contract to a guy in this day and age of college football, when coaches like Kevin Sumlin are getting fired for being 8-4, that's just not going to happen. So I think that somebody's trying to make their story or get their name out there, or whatever it might be. That's not going to be the case. And if it were, I would roundly criticize anybody at Michigan that thought that was a good idea, because that's not telling your players anything. At that point, you're basically saying, hey, we're stuck with this guy, because no matter how good they do or how bad they perform, he's still going to be around. And I don't think Jim Harbaugh would go for something like that. I'm pretty sure the University of Michigan, Ward Manuel, would not go for that. So I think that's just a lot of poppycock. And as far as the NFL rumors, those are always going to swarm around a guy who has coached at the NFL level. So regardless of who you are, whether you're Jim Moore Jr., who got fired at UCLA, whether you're other guys that have coached in the pros and now are back in the college ranks or are into the college ranks, those things are always going to come up, because in the NFL, as we know, the money is better and the players are more talented overall, and you have a little bit more freedom, actually a lot more freedom to do what you want in the NFL. So those things are always going to be there. I don't think Jim Harbaugh is going to go to the NFL, because he's going to be hard-pressed to find a team that will pay him as much as they're going to pay him at Michigan. And I think that he doesn't feel that he's done the job at Michigan, and I don't imagine somebody of his personality leaving a job unfinished.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of Jim Harbaugh, in other words, Jim Harbaugh is actually agreeing with you. That lifetime contract is definitely not going to happen. That's out of the question. Another one of the five questions, however, would be, could he leave for the Chicago Bears? And we'll answer that later on in this episode here. Wilton Spate reportedly will transfer from the university after attending the University of Michigan as a senior. Geno will graduate as well, so the Wolverines are left with Brandon Peters as their next starting quarterback, and he will become a junior and stay at University of Michigan as far as we're concerned, starting next year in 2018. And that's good news.
Well, I think that Coach Harbaugh and Wilton Spate probably had a frank discussion about his status on the team. And I don't think Wilton Speight is guaranteed the starting job coming back next spring or next fall. He'd have to walk into a situation where, at this point, he'd kind of have to win the job back from Brandon Peters, not only because of his play, not only because of his injury, but because they need to move on. They need to get to a quarterback that Jim Harbaugh recruited, that Jim Harbaugh wants to see. And Wilton Speight is a fair to middling college quarterback. He's not the worst thing in the world. He's not the best one. And I think that for Michigan to move on from him, or him to move on from Michigan, is probably something that's good for both parties, because now what it does is it removes him from the equation. Because if he stays at Michigan and doesn't win the starting job, then he's playing out his last year of college eligibility on the bench, or I wouldn't say hoping, but basically waiting for Peters to get injured or for him to falter. And the other side of the coin is if he leaves, now he can go to a team that needs him, or at least would like him there to compete for a starting job. He'll have a better chance of winning it there. And for him, it makes sense because he'll be able to get onto a team that, if he's able to win the starting job, he should be able to hold it for the length of the season. And if he has any aspirations of playing in the NFL, he's going to have to do that. And I don't think he's going to be able to do that at Michigan. Not the same situation as Shane Morris went through, but it's similar in the fact that Michigan's not the best place for Wilton Speight. It certainly wasn't the best place for Shane Morris. So why not transfer out, play your last year of football on the field, and try to prove to the people that have been criticizing you for the past 2-3 years that you do have some ability, and play for a team that, I shouldn't say that wants you there more, but it is going to be a little bit more advantageous for you. So I'm not surprised that he's leaving, and like I said, I think it relieves a lot of pressure from both he and Harbaugh, because now Jim Harbaugh can go confidently into next season saying Brandon Peters is the quarterback. I don't have any issues. There is no quarterback battle. Those people that are going to want Dylan McCaffrey to come in, I mean, he hasn't even played any type of action because he's been redshirted. So unless somebody knows something that a lot of people don't, Brandon Peters is going to be the quarterback next year for Michigan, barring any injuries or any other lingering effects from Peters being hurt at Wisconsin. And like I said, Harbaugh has to get his guy in there because he's now out of options as far as holdovers or transfers that came into the program before or during the change of the guard when Hoke was fired and Harbaugh was in. So I think that it's a clean slate for both of them, and I think that Wilton Speight made the right decision.
We'll see what happens in 2018 when Brandon Peters takes position under center. Now we transition to the Michigan State Spartans.
Touchdown, MSU!
They annihilated the Rutgers Scarlet Knights, as we inevitably predicted, 40-7. They settled for 4 field goals to keep it interesting after Rutgers made it 13-7 with a 42-yard touchdown pass. But the Spartans pulled away late with 3 touchdowns to make it 4 on the game, and they just made that a total mismatch and proved it. Rutgers is still a bad team. The Spartans took full advantage. Well, almost full advantage. They still routed them, well, by 33 points. And it's just an easy win for Michigan State to wrap up their regular season. So the bowl eligibility speaks for itself. Just gonna be a matter of time for MSU, who surpasses U of M in the overall record category, to see which bowl game they can reach.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of differing opinions, and of course it's going to really be determined by the results of the Big Ten championship game with Ohio State and Wisconsin. If Wisconsin wins that game, chances are they're going to be in the college football playoff, which means that the top spot, which is normally reserved for the Big Ten champion, would fall to somebody like either Ohio State, who would be a 3-loss team at that point, or you could look at a team like Penn State, who did not play in the Big Ten championship game, but still has a 2-loss record. So that's going to still hang over which bowl selection either those teams goes to, and it's going to have a domino effect. So if you're Michigan State, you're probably looking at the best case scenario. You're probably looking at a Citrus Bowl. The worst case scenario is something like I said with Michigan, a Holiday Bowl, because if Wisconsin loses, that'll push everybody down one spot, and that will push a team like Michigan into something like the Pinstripe Bowl or the Alamo Bowl or something else that would be reserved for a team of their stature, which is right around 4th or 5th in the conference.
Then you got the Western Michigan Broncos, who fall to 6-6, 37-10 at the Toledo Rockets. The Rockets claimed their MAC West championship. They outmatched the Western Michigan Broncos, and they outplayed them, and they dominated them at the Glass Bowl in Toledo.
And we'll talk about this a little bit, but the MAC, very surprisingly, ended up the way it did. Toledo was hoping for an upset, and they got one. And Northern Illinois falling to Central Michigan, so Toledo will get into the MAC championship game. And, boy, it would be a pretty incredible season for Toledo if they're able to win that one, as they should, as most people expect them to, over Akron, and go to the Quick Lane Bowl, which is typically reserved for the MAC champion. The MAC is just kind of they don't have a real dominant team. There's a couple decent teams at the top, and the rest just kind of chum in the water, I guess. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with all those bowl bids, because now with a lot of teams becoming bowl eligible in that conference, we'll see how the other things in other conferences shake out. But it'll be interesting, and I think that overall, for the conference, it shows a little bit more parity, but still, that East Division is just not good, and it's really hard to give the MAC any credence as far as when you're looking at teams of equal record, because just because of the fact that some of the teams they play in conference play are much less superior than a lot of the other conferences around in what I would consider mid-major college football.
Yeah, in that MAC Least Division, the mediocre American Conference Least Division, the Bowling Green Falcons find another way to lose at the Eastern Michigan Eagles in Ypsilanti at Rennerson Stadium, 35-31, in a game that didn't really matter, but Bowling Green ended up being one of the worst teams in the entire MAC, not just the MAC Least, but in the entire MAC as well. So, Eagles played with pride, and they won by 4, which needs not very little or no explanation. And then you got the Central Michigan Chippewas.
Touchdown, Central Michigan!
Coming back from down 17-0 to the Northern Illinois Huskies, and they beat NIU 31-24. They score a touchdown with 1:32 left, and they hang on to win. CMU improves to 8-4. NIU drops to 8-4. My Chippewas actually finished strong with a win at home, coming back from down 3 scores, or 2.5, as you might say.
Well, yeah, I mean, you get down to a 17-0 lead, and I thought that was going to be on cruise control for the Huskies. And we've talked about Central Michigan's failure to play at home, at least with any degree of competency. But somehow they muster enough and get out to a blazing second half, and really were able to shut down the Huskies' offense after that. and offensively, Shane Morris and his team got fired up, no pun intended, and were able to rattle off 31 points and get the victory. So a great win for Central Michigan, and for them to end their season, at least the regular season, on that note, it's going to be a very motivational tool for them as they go to perhaps a bowl. And at that point, with that win over Northern Illinois, I think that they deserve at least a good look at one of the minor bowls, because beating a team that right now a lot of people will still consider the best in the MAC, even though Toledo will play in the MAC championship because Northern Illinois had beaten Toledo earlier in the season. That's a big victory for them, and we'll see how that all plays out. As I mentioned, the trouble for Central Michigan is to be that strength of schedule, because they're 7-5 against the schedule. When you look at it, that's really kind of pales in comparison to a lot of other teams that are at 7-5.
Yeah, and the Chippewas actually managed to finish 8-4 with at least 2 straight victories. It's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry if they were 8-4, not 7-5. Still, playing the schedule that they did, it's really tough to look at a team that's 8-4 playing in that conference and winning the games that they did and losing to the teams that they did. It's really tough that they're going to have to go against, as far as placement, teams that have far better resumes. So we'll see where it lands, but I think that win against Northern Illinois, at least a signature win for them. And it's hard to tell an 8-14 that you're not going to a bowl. So I imagine them going to one, but it's going to be a tough sled as far as finding a spot for them. That's going to be something that reflects what kind of success they had. So we'll see where they go. And like I said, the biggest point is that big win over Northern Illinois, who was coming into, basically they thought that they were going to go right to the MAC championship game by beating Central Michigan, and that didn't happen. That's a feather in their cap, and John Bonamego, hopefully for him, can use that as a recruiting tool and to get some progress going in Mount Pleasant.
Uh-huh. So since this is the end of the college football regular season, we don't have to do our college football in the Mitten Quick Picks segment, which transitions us from college football to college basketball. The Michigan State Spartans, as we just saw prior to this podcast, this episode, they dominated the North Carolina Tar Heels 63-45 in the PK80 victory bracket championship game. First time in 8 meetings the Spartans have beaten the Tar Heels. The Tar Heels shot only 25%, one of the lowest in a long time in school history, and MSU's defense took advantage and their offense did the other half of their job. Number 9 versus number 4. Number 4 came out victorious.
Yeah, one of the things I noticed, and I didn't get to watch much of it because preseason college basketball just doesn't really interest me very much, but one of the things I noticed is inside Michigan State had decided advantage. North Carolina doesn't have any real post players to speak of, and Roy Williams is famous for his inside-out gaming, where you can have a weapon inside and that turns the offense on outside and vice versa. So it becomes hard to defend with the multiple options that they have, and lacking that post presence, or at least the presence of a real down low player, really limits them. And I thought Michigan State, because they have a decent front court, was able to exploit that early, got out to a big start, and it was a real uphill climb for North Carolina after that. And again, preseason, or at least I shouldn't say preseason, but non-conference college basketball, again, doesn't really interest me, simply because the good teams, the Tom Izzo's of the world, the John Beelines, Yes, they like to win those games. Yes, they like to play good competition, but they're also gearing up for the conference season, which is going to come relatively quickly here with the new scheduling in the Big Ten. So that's what they're looking at. They're not looking at wins and losses necessarily, but they're looking at how their team shapes up down the stretch because they have enough built-in wins with some of the non-conference games that they schedule that they'll be able to at least strengthen their resume and have enough wins if they're to be successful in the conference season to get them into the NCAA tournament. Michigan was a really kind of just a baffling bad loss against LSU in the Maui Invitational, but they're able to work through some things and get a couple other victories. But again, and when you're looking at that, John Beeline is still mixing and matching, and kind of the same principle here for Michigan State is I know that Tom Izzo knows what he's got as far as a starting lineup, but he has a pretty young team when you look at the overall construction of it, and he's still trying to find some things out about his team as well, because going into the conference season, he wants them to be at the top of their game. So this win over North Carolina is a nice victory for them, but I think that Tom Izzo will tell you, if you were to ask him point blank, he'd say, these games don't matter much to him because he's looking at Big Ten play and getting into the NCAA tournament and getting them ready to peak at the right time.
That's how those kind of games can carry over into the Big Ten season, which starts early after their Notre Dame Fighting Irish game Thursday at 7 on ESPN in the ACC Big Ten Challenge. They start their Big Ten Conference with the Nebraska Cornhuskers Sunday at 4:30 on FS1 at Breslin Center, and then they go to Rutgers and play the Scarlet Knights Tuesday at 7. Next week Tuesday at 7 on BTN. So it's an early start for not only Michigan State but Michigan as well. But MSU looks like they are ready for that Big Ten season.
Yeah, like I mentioned with the scheduling now by the Big Ten to get 2 early conference games in before the new year, those are critical games because you can't get off to a bad start. Can't lose those first 2 games and end up behind the 8 ball when the real conference slate starts. And so those are going to be games that they want to be ready for. And if you're Michigan State or Michigan, these preseason, or these I keep saying preseason, but it's non-conference, but these non-conference games against opponents that are highly ranked, it's great for resume building, but at the same time it's a nightmare for coaches because the teams that have good programs year in and year out really rely on those non-conference games to feel their way around the lineup and get a good grasp of what their team is able to do and not to do and help them grow as the conference season makes its way through. So it'll be interesting to see in the ACC Big Ten Challenge, but boy, that's always been, at least in my memory, the ACC has typically dominated that crossover series, and I think for really the top teams, it's a time for them to play some teams that they normally wouldn't, which is good for ratings, it's good for TV, it's good for everybody that's invested that way. But like I said, I think the coaches would much rather not have to do that. But that's what happens in the game of big college basketball. You're going to play some teams because you got to make money somewhere, and it'll be interesting to see how that matchup goes.
Yep. And speaking of North Carolina and Michigan,
For 3, yes, sir.
the Wolverines and Tar Heels tip off Wednesday at 7:30 on ESPN in the ACC as another part of the ACC Big Ten Challenge. Michigan lost to LSU 77-75 in the first round of the Maui Invitational last week, but then they beat 2 more easy teams to finish off their consolation rounds. So the Wolverines are not going to be a joke, but they're going to have a really busy schedule, a really tough schedule ahead. They got North Carolina Wednesday at 7:30 on ESPN. The Indiana Hoosiers Saturday at 12:30 on CBS at Chrysler Center. And then they go to Value Center, play the Ohio State Buckeyes Monday. It's next week Monday at 6:30 on FS1. That's a tough schedule right there.
Well, I mean, Indiana is pretty terrible. They got waxed by Indiana State, and they're kind of on the rebuild from the Tom Crean era. That said, you still have to play the games, and those are conference games that you want to win. Ohio State also introducing a new head coach this year after Thad Matta was let go. So if you're Michigan, you're kind of happy because those games right now, going into new coaches that are with new teams, and they're trying to feel their way out, whereas he's kind of in that same section, I guess, of the season. He's got a lot more knowledge about his team than those teams do with their head coaches. So I think that if you're Michigan, you're definitely looking forward to at least those two conference games as getting kind of a step up on the schedule. The game against North Carolina should be interesting because Michigan has been working. Their front court is not the issue. Their back court has been the issue, just trying to find the right combination. And Duncan Robinson hasn't played well early through the season, and he's trying to find his way a little bit. So it'll be interesting to see how they play against North Carolina. But then they have those two games in conference, and then they go right back on the trail. They will be playing UCLA after that, and then Texas. So two high-profile, if not highly talented teams that are coming up for them in that schedule. So the schedule gets a little real for Michigan in the next 4 games, and they have a couple of passes to play before they start Big Ten conference play for the majority, or for the rest of the season when they face Iowa on January 2nd. So it'll be interesting to see how Michigan performs. I wouldn't put a ton of stock in how they perform, whether it's a win or loss against North Carolina, but the next 6-7 games for them are really going to be focal point because you can't fall too far behind, and you want to build up those W's in the non-conference slate as much as you can so that when it comes to conference play, you give yourself a little leeway.
Mm-hmm. And then we shift back to the Mid-American Conference. The Central Michigan Chippewas basketball team won the Great Alaskan Shootout with a 75-72 win over Cal State Bakersfield. Their MAC season doesn't start until January, unlike the Big Ten Conference Championship. MAC season, I believe, begins like somewhere a few days into January or something like that.
Yeah, well, the one thing is that's the last Great Alaska Shootout ever. And it kind of tells you how a tournament that was really one of the premier tournaments 20 years ago has fallen. They're not going to have it anymore. And, not a knock on Central Michigan, but they were getting teams that were a lot better that were winning that as recently as 5 years ago. But that tournament struggles simply because of the time frame that it's in. Obviously Alaska being 6 hours behind us in time zone, it really hurts the ratings. It's hard to get those valuable TV dollars when you're playing games that start at 1 o'clock in the morning Eastern time. So it's difficult, and as college basketball goes, obviously you need the money to keep things going, and there's other tournaments that have sprung up that have kind of supplanted the Great Alaska Shootout, but it's a good win for Central Michigan. They'll take it. They're not gonna decline it. I mean, they'll take the wins. And looking at their schedule, they also have some teams in front of them that should be able to be handled with relative ease. And as they go into MAC play, starting in January, they should be cemented in for a decent run, and we'll see how they play in conference.
Yep. Western and Eastern also start their MAC schedules in early January as well. So that's college basketball in the men. Now we transition to pro basketball in the men and the Detroit Pistons.
Left sideline 3, and he answers.
Last Monday night at Little Caesars Arena, the played the second of the back-to-back games at Little Caesars Arena against the Cleveland Cavaliers after beating the Minnesota Timberwolves 197. They got clobbered by the Cleveland Cavaliers 116-88. Now, the Pistons were tired, and Stan Van Gundy did not play Boban Marjanovic, a fresh Boban Marjanovic, who, again, like I recommended so many times, Stan Van Gundy still doesn't do that, and he really wore out all of his players except he at least used a fresh Henry Ellenson, which contributed a little bit offensively, but they still could have used Boban Marjanovic for a little extra offense. Again, he's not known for his defense. We get that, but when it comes down to the offensive game and the Pistons are not playing defense, then they need their offense to catch up. And Stan Van Gundy made the wrong decisions, and he blamed himself. And I blame him for not using Boban Marjanovic to top the cherry on top of the sundae. Stan Van Gundy blamed himself for not getting the team prepared and not making the right decisions. That all sums it up.
Yeah, I mean, you look at that game, and only 3 guys in double figures for the Pistons. Andre Drummond, not one of them. Only 25 minutes, 8 rebounds, 8 points. They were definitely dragging, and that's a tough game to play. Back-to-back, you're coming in on the road from the road to a home game the next night, and we knew that this would be a tough game for the Pistons. Cleveland coming in, and
the defending Eastern Conference champions.
Yeah, I mean, and they're not playing as well, but still they have some talent. But the Pistons just started out flat, and it never got any better for them. I was really
they started out close, but then they started falling down the rest of the way.
Well, they ended this first quarter down 13, and they ended out the half down 27. And at that point, the game was over. So
that's kind of what I meant.
That said, it was going to be a tough game from the outset, but I was just surprised at the lineup construction, or at least the substitution pattern that Stan Van Gundy used. I don't think preparation was as big of an issue as the fact that he just had a tired team. And for a team that relies on movement and outside shooting as much as the Pistons do, that's kind of a bad combination to be coming in tired. So that game, I kind of figured that they would lose. I didn't think they'd lose it in as spectacular fashion as they did. The fourth quarter kind of masked how bad that game was, because Pistons did outscore the Cavaliers by 11 in that last quarter to make the final margin a little bit more pretty, if you can say that about a team that loses by 28. But yeah, it was not a good game for them. But in the grand scheme of things, in an 82-game schedule, you're going to have those nights, and that was just a night for the Pistons just to forget, because they were coming off a tough road win at Minnesota, had to fly back home and play still a force to be reckoned with in the Eastern Conference, that is the Cleveland Cavaliers. So I was kind of surprised that Boban didn't get in. We kind of thought that he might, this being one of those games that you thought he could get in, and unfortunately for him, didn't see any floor time. And if he's not going to see floor time when you're down by 39 at one point, I don't know when he's going to.
Yeah, Stan Van Gundy's getting too old to be a head coach now. I get that his Pistons are 12-6, but that's when you lose to an elite team. That's even though they don't start to, they're not off to as good a start as we expect them to be. The Cleveland Cavaliers, for example, when you still lose like that, this makes your 12-6 record, your now 12-6 record, look not as good as it should be.
Well, and they had won 4 straight going into that game. They had a couple days of rest, so
yeah. I know.
Again, it was expected that the Pistons would lose that game. I just think that the way they lost, it was a little bit surprising in the fact that I think that they just didn't look like they came to play, and that happens over an 82-game season, and hopefully they can move on, and they did. They beat the Thunder in a very close basketball game on Friday, and beat a team that really is still in the thick of the Western Conference race as far as contending, even though they're only they were at that time at 500. Still, people consider them to be one of the outside contenders as far as getting into the playoffs. So it's a good win for the Pistons on Friday night, and hopefully they can use that as a springboard to better success in the games to come.
Yeah, Andre Drummond vastly improved in that game. 17 points, 14 rebounds at the Oklahoma City Thunder. They had to barely hang on to beat Oklahoma City. Russell Westbrook missing the three at the buzzer. The Pistons defense kind of slipped and slid, but only to allow a miss at the buzzer, and they still hang on for dear safety and dear life to win that game. That said, they're at Boston tomorrow, Monday at 7:30. Home against the Phoenix Suns Wednesday at 7, at the Washington Wizards Friday at 7, and then at the Philadelphia 76ers Saturday at 7:30. So the Pistons are playing the first place in the Eastern Conference, Boston Celtics, and then afterwards they got a sort of easy schedule going on, except they lost to the Philadelphia 76ers in their first meeting at Little Caesars Arena, 97-86. The 76ers are not as bad as we thought would be, but still, this was a team the Pistons should have beaten.
Well, yeah, I mean, you look at the 76ers and obviously improved over what they've been through in the last 8-9 years, and finally things are starting to round into form for them as they would come in with a much better record than I think people would have thought that they would have had at this point. That said, you look at the teams that they've lost to, and the teams that they've lost to, you kind of expected it. They're not beating the teams that are significantly better than them. And they did beat the Rockets early in the season, but other than that, boy, it's really been kind of an up and down year for the Sixers. But they are starting to assert themselves and start to make some progress. So if you're the Pistons, hopefully you can go into that game knowing that what happened last time, that's something you need to pay attention to, and hopefully they can come out with a better effort.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of Andre Drummond, there was an article from Fansided headlining from Scott Rafferty. Andre Drummond is no longer an archaic center in the pace and space NBA. They talk about his post-ups.
Yeah, I mean, I gave that a quick read. Right. Yeah, I mean, I gave that a quick read before we came on, and basically what it boils down to is Stan Van Gundy modified the offense a little bit, but also convinced Andre Drummond that he is not a back-to-the-basket guy, and they have tried to fit him into that square peg into a round hole for so many years before this year finally getting him to face up to the basket and work from the elbow rather than down on the block. And what that's been able to do is it opens up a lot more space for the front court guys like Avery Bradley to either drive or run kind of, it's not really a pick and roll, but it's almost like a screen and go. And looking at some of the clips that they showed, basically what they've done is they've turned Andre Drummond into a stretch four, and a lot of his game now is off the dribble, because if you get that guy going down with a head full of steam, there's not be too many guys that play that position that can stop him. So they've just kind of finally got his game to where it should be, which is the guy that creates off the dribble with his athleticism rather than standing with his back to the basket, because as we've seen throughout his career, when you throw it down in there, and his post-ups, I mean, they are deplorable stats when you look at the points per possession and all the other advanced metrics that you can do to chart that type of progress. And
0.73 to be exact.
Yeah, I mean, they've almost doubled their points per possession when he's handled the ball on the elbow versus down on the block. So it just makes sense. And I think that this is part of the maturation process for Drummond, and also kind of the evolution of coaching for Stan Van Gundy, because throwing it down to him on the block just isn't a productive move, and they've been able to change it and get him to buy in with some success. And I think we've seen that here early in the season with his increased offensive productivity, and also his offensive rebounding has been as good or better than it's been in most of his career. So it seems to be working out. And again, sometimes that doesn't work out because in an 82-game schedule, not everything goes according to plan every time. And I think that for Andre Drummond, it just shows that there's some progress. And hopefully, finally, in his 7th year of professional basketball, he's starting to realize that if he listens to people and does what they tell him, they're trying to put him into a position of success rather than hinder him or fit him into a specific role.
So to prove that this article in general proves that Drummond's a better elbow player than a post player, whereas Boban Marjanovic is a beanstalk in the post. So if you could put Drummond out on the elbow and Marjanovic in the post, I know they're both centers, but if you're a smarter head coach than old Stan Van Gundy, you would use both of them to
I think the problem with using both of them is the spacing issue, because if you have Boban in the post and Andre at the elbow, then it allows defenses to kind of concentrate, and it doesn't give driving lanes to guys like Bradley who prefer that over spot-up shooting.
Agreed.
It could work against some teams, and I think it would be interesting to see, though, to work on. And again, when you're playing a team like the Cavaliers and you're getting hammered, boy, what a great time to do it. That's the kind of thing that I'm wondering about Stan Van Gundy. Not that they lose by 28 points, because that's going to happen to you in professional basketball, but the fact that he didn't start to tinker with the lineup and do some different things that, I mean, you're going to lose the game, so why not try to do it? I mean, you see football coaches do it all the time, where you're losing the game by 28 points. Let's put this guy here. Let's run this type of play, or let's do this, because it's not going to hurt us any worse than what we're doing right now. And I think it's just one of those things that for Stan Van Gundy, having the tenure that he does, he's obviously set in the way that he coaches basketball, and it's not bad the way he does it, the way he runs his offense, but you got to be open to some new things. And I thought they might try that against the Cavaliers after they got down by a considerable margin, but it didn't happen. But that is something that they may try down the road. But again, the spacing issue really happens there because you have two guys that are pretty dependent on having a lot of room to work, and when you have those guys both out there, kind of intersects those points and makes it a little bit tougher for the offense to run. But I'd be interested to see at least what it looks like in a working situation rather than just talk about it. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work.
Another option would be to alternate between Drummond and Marjanovic, just to save the Pistons' offense more space against opposing defenses. Drummond can just work in the elbow, and Marjanovic can work more in the post, alternatively.
Right, and I think that Stan Van Gundy would like a back-to-the-basket option. I think it would help them against some teams. Eric Moreland, like I said, has been kind of cleaning up the rest of the backup minutes at the 5, and at this point, he's not a proven scorer. He's a good defender and rebounder, and in the mold of what Aaron Baines kind of was supposed to do last year. When you're putting Eric Moreland in, his forte is the defensive end. He can produce offensively, but they don't really lean on him to do that. And I think that if you're going to put Boban in and use him exclusively out of the post, Like I said, Stan Van Gundy really could make his offense more flexible. So far, that hasn't happened.
Well, there you go, folks. Hopefully Stan Van Gundy finally reconsiders using Boban Marjanovic in at least some games, giving him more minutes for crying out loud. Now he's transitioned to hockey in the Red Wings. Speaking of getting shellacked at home, they get absolutely shellacked by the Edmonton Oilers, a team the Red Wings beat in Edmonton 4-0 a couple weeks prior. The Edmonton Oilers, the Red Wings gave the Edmonton Oilers the game. The Oilers they let the Edmonton Oilers give them a dose of their own medicine. Jonathan Ericsson being Jonathan Ericsson again, and Jimmy Howard, getting blasted by the Oilers. Peter Mrazek takes over. The Red Wings were playing sloppy in that game, and then they go into New York. Tatar scores that only goal for the Red Wings, and Dylan Larkin leaves Matt Zuccarello open for that overtime winner, 2-1 in MSG. Then back at Little Caesars Arena, they lose it in overtime again to the New Jersey Devils, who are in second place in the Metropolitan Division, surprisingly. The Devils they had a 3-1 lead. They were a better team than the Red Wings have been. The Red Wings, as far as we're concerned, still third in the Atlantic Division. They actually got back up to third in the Atlantic Division. Now, let me check on the standings here. They're 10-8-3 with 23 points. And checking on the Eastern Conference standings, 10-9-5 with 25 points, rather. Still third place in the Atlantic Division. How is this still possible?
Well, I think it's a combination of things. Number one, if you look at the week, you talked about those three games. The particularly disappointing one was the Oilers game. You had a team coming in, having played a game the night before in St. Louis, and the Red Wings, who had been at home after they lost to the Avalanche on that previous Sunday, with 2 days of full rest, and welcoming the team in that had played the night before. Just a really terrible effort. Coach Jeff Blashill called out Anthony Mantha for his lack of effort, and people got upset because Jonathan Ericsson was, again, a flaming pile of trash, and nobody talks about how bad he is. But really, it was the whole team. And I think that for Jeff Blashill to call Anthony Mantha was right, because what are you going to do at this point? You're going to call out Jonathan Ericsson, who everybody knows is bad, and just at this point, it's a sunk cost with him, or are you going to call out a guy that hopefully you can get some more production out of and motivate to play a better game? So, looking at that, they just get blasted by the Oilers. Just a terrible performance. And then they go out to New York, and Henrik Lundqvist, in his advancing age, was vintage King Henrik. I mean, just literally stole the show from the Red Wings. And then Dylan Larkin with an abysmal mistake in overtime, just leaving the guy wide open who buries it for the OT winner.
Matt Zuccarello.
They get a point out of a game that they really shouldn't have gotten a point out of. So that's kind of a plus for them. And then the Devils playing last night, they were down 3-1 for the Red Wings. They came back to tie that game up before losing in overtime. So another point where they really shouldn't have gotten one. I think that if you're looking at how they performed this week and the teams they're going to be playing in the next couple of days, at least this next week, they really have some chances to make up some ground and solidify that third spot in the Atlantic Division. I don't know if they can keep that type of pace throughout the entire season. The one thing that hasn't happened has been a catastrophic injury to anybody up front. It's all been on the back end, which we knew was kind of a dumpster fire to start with. So They've kind of avoided that injury bug up front, but 2 games where they shouldn't have gotten a point, and a game against the Oilers where they should have been a lot better than they were. So Red Wings, again, still kind of teeter-tottering between mediocrity and a playoff team. But the other side of that coin is in the Atlantic Division. There's a lot of teams that are underperforming and just aren't doing what they thought they would be doing at this point of the season. So when you look at the Atlantic Division, teams like the Bruins and the Senators, Bruins, I think, losing today, I had to double-check that, but the Canadiens, who are not so good, and the Panthers as well, not playing well at this point. So if you're the Red Wings, you got to be happy with where they're at, obviously at 10-9-5, but at the same time, you're looking up at teams like Toronto and Tampa Bay, and Detroit is simply not at that level. If you look at the goals scored, they've only scored 69 goals on the season. When you compare that to Tampa Bay and the Maple Leafs, almost a 20-goal spread between those two teams as far as how far the Red Wings are back of them. So goal scoring is going to continue to be an issue for Detroit as the season drags on. And if you don't score a lot of goals and your defense isn't very good, chances are that's going to weigh towards more losses than it does wins. So right now they're keeping their head above water, but if that type of trend continues, it's going to be really tough for them to keep that third spot in the Atlantic Division over teams like Boston and Ottawa.
They got the LA Kings Tuesday night, LL Caesars Arena at 7:30. Then they got those terrible aforementioned Canadiens in a home-and-home stand Thursday at 7:30 at Little Caesars Arena. And then they go to Bell Center and play the Habs at 7 o'clock on Saturday. That's the entire week we should look at for the Red Wings here. So, transitioning now to baseball.
That one is long gone.
Angel Mesbitt, a former Detroit Tigers relief pitcher, suspended 50 games for testing positive for the stimulant heptaminol, one of the performance-enhancing drugs. Those penalties were announced Friday by the commissioner's office. That was back on November 20th. That was 2 Fridays ago was the announcement, but the story broke from the Associated Press on ESPN.com last Monday. It was just another former Detroit Tiger getting suspended for PEDs. This is not quite like Johnny Peralta or something like that. Johnny Peralta was a current Tiger being suspended for 50 games back in 2013. But Mesbitt looks like he last played for the Blue Jays as far as we're concerned. 3 players from the Toronto Blue Jays were suspended. I believe Mesbitt was one of them.
Well, there was a sweep, and there was 5 minor leaguers in total that were suspended. Now, Angel Mesbitt was obviously a free agent at that point because he had not signed a contract. So this happens almost every year. I mean, they're going to do testing, and for guys that aren't attached to a team, it becomes more important for them because now if they want to get in with a team, they can't play for those 50 games or more. So this is the type of thing that MLB does. What it does for them is it allows baseball to kind of, before they get to the winter meetings and set things in motion as far as free agent signings and trades, it allows them to know who's going to be on that list because now it's easier to do those tests before, and they have random tests throughout the year, but it's easier to do those tests before because it helps the general managers set the table as far as transactions go. So I think for this, it's just one of those things that it's going to happen, and it happened to tag a former Tiger in Angel Mesbitt, so he will not play for the first 50 games for whatever team that he was able to sign with, if any, because of that suspension.
So there you go. Not much to see there, not much to explain there either. So that leads us to our first of two segments, the 5 questions segment.
It's time for 5 questions on the Michigan Sports Truth.
Question number 1, what are the chances the Lions still make and or miss the playoffs?
Well, that one's tough. I think that's when you look at that question, there's a lot of available answers as far as how that could go. And I obviously there's only 2 that really can come about. But I think right now, if you had to assess the Lions' chances, even though they sit at 6-5 and are on the outside looking in, their schedule is favorable as far as win-loss record for the teams that they're playing. So you would think that if the Lions were indeed a playoff team, that they would be beating those teams and being able to advance into the playoffs. I think the real pivotal game now comes against Baltimore, because they lose to Baltimore. The teams that I mentioned earlier, the Carolinas and the Atlantas of the world, pretty much the whole NFC South, other than Tampa Bay, they all hold tiebreakers over the Lions because of their wins in the regular season. And those are the teams that the Lions are fighting with for playoff position. So they need to win. Those teams need to lose for them to have a chance, and the schedule sets up for it. If I had to assess it right now, I would say it's a coin flip, simply because even though they're at 6-5 and not looking good, and they wouldn't be in the playoffs if they started today, they're playing some teams that are going to be playing out the strength. You got the Bengals, the Bucks, the Bears, the Packers, and the Ravens. The Ravens are obviously the best matchup as far as team talent-wise that they're going to face in those 5 games. But you can't discount the fact that they're going to be playing 2 division games in the last 3 weeks of the season. Regardless of how those teams are playing, it's a division game, and they'd like nothing better than to knock the Lions down a peg by winning those games. So I think it's a coin flip. Like I said, if I had to put money on it right now, I think that I would say that the Lions will not make the playoffs by virtue of the fact that the teams ahead of them will probably keep pace and be able to eclipse them, not only by record, but also holding the cards as far as the tiebreakers are concerned.
Good point.
Next question.
Question number 2, could Jim Harbaugh be leaving Michigan sometime soon for the Chicago Bears?
No. Right, no. I don't think that's going to happen. Now, stranger things have happened, but for him to leave at this point in his tenure at Michigan would be a pretty hollow move, not only for him, but really for Michigan athletics as a whole, because he's got a job to do, and he hasn't even gotten to the point where he feels that he's accomplished that. At least I wouldn't think that he would believe that to be true. So, no, I just don't think that's going to happen. And I think a lot of these rumors start to happen at this time of year because guys are getting let go, guys are moving between teams, and it all happens very quickly. And when you're a Michigan team that has not had success over the last part of a decade, they've become fodder for that type of rumor. But I just don't think that Jim Harbaugh would leave for the NFL, because any situation he'd be going to in the NFL wouldn't be as advantageous as what he's got now. So I'm just going to say no to that.
I'd say the same thing.
Next question.
Question number 3, how can the Wolverines football team fare with Brandon Peters at quarterback and without John O'Korn and Wilton Spade? I would say they would fare much better with Brandon Peters if he keeps up his firepower from this year prior to his terrible head injury at Wisconsin. I think the Wolverines will have plenty of offense next year in 2018. They're going to need it against elite teams like Ohio State and Wisconsin and even Michigan State.
Well, you look at Brandon Pierce's situation. He's now point the unquestioned starter because John Corona will graduate and Bolton Spate will be transferring. So his job got a little bit easier as far as winning the starting quarterback position is concerned. But they do have some guys that Harbaugh has brought in, Dylan McCaffrey, and I cannot remember the other one for the life of me, but there's also another quarterback that they recruited, they brought in last year. And those are the three that he's going to have to mold and shape during spring ball going into next season. And I think that a full year of practice at number 1 reps.
I got the name. Stephen Threet.
Yeah. He's going to have a full year of number 1 rep, or I should say a full spring of number 1 reps. So you've got that going for you. So you're hoping at this point that he's able to progress. And after he recovers from the injury and they're able to get him into practice and a lot more reps than he's been getting, that you would think at this point that he would be able to ascend and improve to the point where he is the unquestioned starter. And when you look at this, like I said, next year, the schedule does not work out for them. I mean, they've got 3 tough games that are all on the road. 2 of them are in conference, plus the fact that they'll be playing again another 9-game conference schedule. So they're only going to have 3 out-of-conference games. One of those is Notre Dame, and that's another team that they're going to have to go on the road to play. The other 2 are SMU and Western Michigan. And Western Michigan, they're going to have some guys graduate, so you would think that Michigan should be able to impose their will on them, and SMU's just not a very good football team. So that said, they should be able to fatten up on their home schedule, but you're playing Ohio State, Michigan State, and Notre Dame all on the road. Notre Dame's your season opener. They've got their work cut out for them, and you're going to need a quarterback that can move the football and keep your defense off of the field to have any chance of beating any of those teams. So Brandon Peters, I think that for Michigan football in their future, he has to be as good as advertised or better, because if he's not, it's going to be another tough year for them.
Mm-hmm.
Next question.
Question number 4. Did the Michigan State Spartans men's basketball team, speaking of which, earn their number 4 spot in the AP poll rankings after beating North Carolina?
I would absolutely say so. These rankings, again, are subject to change, obviously, but at this point, Michigan State has played a pretty robust schedule, and they've performed just about as well as we thought they would. So definitely, number 4, they started out the season at number 2. I don't put a lot of stock in rankings anytime before you get to conference play, because that's a completely different animal when you're talking about power basketball conferences and having those games at different arenas. So it's hard for me to say that ranking surprises me, just because you really don't know what this team is made of until you get to conference play. I know that they'll be playing some high-ranked opponents in the non-conference part, but at this point they have earned a number 4 spot simply because they went out and beat a pretty decent North Carolina team today and handled them with relative ease. They played Duke tough in their first game of the season, and they're going to play Notre Dame in the ACC Challenge, and that's another team that is a top 25 team in my estimation. So, they for sure have earned that ranking, and until we get into Big Ten play, we're not going to know a ton about Michigan State basketball other than what we already do, and they are a very good team. So, yes, I would say that they've earned it to this point.
Next question.
And finally, question number 5. Speaking of basketball, has Stan Van Gundy run his course as the head coach of the Pistons?
Well, this is a tough one, too, because I think that for Stan Van Gundy, the team president, that they've done a pretty good job of constructing the roster to Stan Van Gundy's the coach and his specifications, but his unwillingness to go outside the box and do different things, I think has kind of stunted their growth a little bit. But at the same time, when I always talk about people getting removed from jobs, and it doesn't matter what sport or what level, you have to have somebody better in mind that's going to replace them. And too many times, I mean, I'll just give an example out of college football. Kevin Sumlin is going to get fired or has gotten fired at Texas A&M. I haven't heard if he has officially been fired yet, but he's going to probably be fired. And when you look at Texas A&M, they've lost 3 games to top 15 opponents. They play in the SEC, and they're not better than Alabama. So what is your goal? Because if your goal is to be better than Alabama, you're not going to find very many coaches that are going to go from their current position to go beat Alabama. And to get rid of a guy just because he hasn't beaten a good team doesn't mean that you should fire him. I mean, I think maybe you have a talk and say, hey, this is what we expect, but you have to have somebody better in mind. And the same thing goes for the Pistons. If you got rid of Stan Van Gundy, or if he got rid of himself, who are you going to get to coach him? I mean, that's the question you have to ask about that particular position. Not has Stan Van Gundy run his course, because I think that right now for the Pistons, they're kind of at the ceiling of where he's going to be able to get them in the Eastern Conference landscape as it sits right now. But if you get rid of him, who are you bringing in that can get them to the next level? And that's the tough question. So has he run his course? I think he's gotten him as far as about as far as he's going to get them. But to get rid of him means you're bringing in somebody else that can get them to the next level. And that's a really tough question. So I don't think he's run his course as far as he's not going to be fired or he's not going to be relieved of his duties. But I think that he's got them to the point right now that this is about as much as he's going to be able to get out of this team.
Yeah, and his unwillingness to think outside the box. Here's an example. Here's the biggest example. Playing Boban Marjanovic, for God's sake. You can't just keep sitting him and wasting his contract. If you're not going to play him, buy him out. Otherwise, play him.
Yeah, I mean, like it's been interesting that he talked about it all last season after it was over that he wanted to get him in more, and boy, he's gotten him in less. So, if you're so enamored with his potential and his ability, you would think he'd be getting him out there, but that hasn't happened. And like I said, I don't think that the Pistons can get much better than what they are right now. But the fact remains that unless you can find somebody better, I mean, unless a guy like Brad Stevens or Steve Kerr is going to replace him, which isn't going to happen, there's not too many names out there that you can say would be able to take the Pistons to the next level and do it in a consistent manner, especially in an Eastern Conference that really is dominated right now, still, even though Cleveland hasn't got off to the greatest start, by Boston and Cleveland. So until you can find that guy, Stan Van Gundy is still going to be your head coach, unless they completely fall off the deep end and stop playing the way they are and flounder and miss the playoffs.
That's true. They're going to reap what they sow if this continues to happen. I can only just sit and watch. That wraps up our 5 questions segment, that being said. And to our entire audience, if they want to answer those 5 questions, just replay that segment portion of this episode and answer them the best you can without going out of line. Now for the other segment, what's your grade?
Pencils down, everyone. It's time to find out what's your grade.
All right, one event, just one, and we're going to hit it on the head like we mean it. The Pistons not using Boban Marjanovic against the Cleveland Cavaliers at Little Caesars Arena. I grade that an F. Simple F. Your players were tired, and you still didn't bring in a fresh 7-3 beanstalk from Serbia that can still provide you extra offense to keep it closer to the game, even if you're not going to win it. against the defending Eastern Conference champion Cleveland Cavaliers, who didn't have quite as good of a record as the Pistons had, obviously, going into that game. But I grade that an F. You can't just stick with the same players and get blown out in the second of back-to-back games, one on the road and then the other at home against a defending Eastern Conference champion and three-time Eastern Conference champion Cleveland Cavaliers team. Buck, what's your grade on that?
Yeah, I'm going to go with a D-. The only reason I do that, I don't give him an F, is because I don't think that had they put him in, that it would have made a ton of difference as far as the win and the loss column. But he used 13 guys in the game, did Stan Van Gundy, but not one of them was Boban Marjanovic. And I think the biggest point that you could make for him not being used was the fact that defensively they were just getting cut up. And we know that the strength of Boban Marjanovic's game is not defense. So Stan Van Gundy probably looks at that and says, well, we're getting killed defensively. And if I put him in, it probably isn't going to get any better on that end. So I'm going to stick with what I got. I mean, it was 101-62 after 3 quarters of play. So at that point, it's garbage time. It's been garbage time for pretty much the entire second half. It's the perfect time to play somebody that's been rotting on the end of your bench. And he emptied it almost to completion, except for Marjanovic. So it was puzzling, just because we thought, boy, if there's going to be a game that he gets to play in, this should be it. And it didn't happen. I think if the game had been closer and they had needed some offense, he probably would have gotten in. But because of the fact that they were so far behind, and it was mainly a product of their poor defense, that Stan Van Gundy didn't put him in. But I'll still give it a D- because I don't know why he didn't play him in the fourth quarter. There was nothing to lose. They weren't going to play any of their best players, and neither were the Cleveland Cavaliers. So let it be a bench game and get some guys some minutes.
Yeah, and Stan Van Gundy didn't even do that. Not even a split second. So that's our What's Your Grade segment. So for our audience, if they have a grade for that event, post it in the comment bank in this episode. Please don't go out of line. That's episode 292 of the Week in Review in the Michigan Sports Truth on Spreaker, SoundCloud, and iHeartRadio. Before we sign off, I want to remind everyone to share this episode on our entire podcast on social media and have their friends share that as well, because we want to tell them that the Michigan Sports Truth podcast is boosting its post of each episode on Spreaker, SoundCloud, and iHeartRadio on its Facebook page, and searching for a wider local audience that is fans of sports and local advertising sponsors. If anyone has a local business in the state of Michigan that has a passion for sports and is interested in sponsoring this podcast, send our Facebook page a message. Buck, nice work as always. Excellent as always. We'll talk to you next week on episode 293.
Yes, sir.
Yep. So I'm Taylor Phillips. Follow me on Twitter at DT2Phillips and Buck Geno at Buck Geno III, 3 I's for Roman numerals. Like and share the Michigan Sports Truth Facebook page and join its Facebook group. We'll talk to you next week on episode 293. Thanks very much for listening, downloading, and sharing TTFN. Ta-ta for now.
Bon appétit.
Transmission complete.